A senior U.S. State Department official says it's getting ready for a worst-case scenario regarding the ongoing crisis between Russia and Ukraine. The Pentagon has begun moving some of its forces out of the country, and Americans living in Ukraine have been advised to leave. John Lawrence reports.
President Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin had a 62-minute call Saturday as international concern grows about Moscow and Ukraine. According to a White House readout, Biden told Putin a, quote, further Russian invasion of Ukraine would produce widespread human suffering and diminish Russia's standing. U.S. officials estimate there are more than 100,000 Russian troops near Ukraine's border.
Personally, I find it hard to conceive that he would go to the trouble of this massive buildup for the second time merely as a show of strength.
Prior to the Biden-Putin talk, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs claimed Western countries and the press are spreading a large-scale disinformation campaign. But U.S. officials say an invasion could be imminent.
There could be a very substantial invasion of Ukraine. It could include trying to take down the capital of Kyiv.
The U.S. is sending 3,000 additional troops to Poland, joining the 1,700 already there to help Americans leave Ukraine.
If President Putin decides to take military action, we will swiftly impose severe economic sanctions in coordination with allies and partners around the globe. We'll bolster Ukraine's ability to defend itself. We will reinforce our allies on the eastern flank of NATO.
I'm John Lawrence reporting.